Whenever you're ready, Joe. No, stay.
Yeah, we're not this close, but we look like it for TV. My name's Terry Wooster. I'm from Chamberlain. I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, which puts on this annual book festival.
Here.
Thank you for being here. Do I speak into his shirt?
Oh, there you go.
No. He says we're good.
Oh,
He says we're good. Hope you enjoy the festival. We like feedback. There are forms you can get at the information desk, or there's a QR code somewhere, and don't ask me about that part. But I think my daughter would have known. Look, this thing is free, almost everything in here, but to keep it that way, it takes donations. And you can visit sdhumanities.org, or you can stop at the information desk and they'll tell you about it. If you make a gift for $50, you get the print of the cover photo. Another 10 gives you another chance to win it. The festival would not be possible without the support of some large donors. Their names are on the back. If any of them are here, we would recognize you. Today's program is called The Phantom Storm, and it's how the story of Sitting Bull has been told. I'll tell you a little bit about the author. I had you before.
all you have to say is I'm from California, and everybody will ask why are you doing this program?
Okay, he's from California, but don't ask Shelley invited doing this program. Norm Matteoni
Yes.
received a BA from the University of Santa Clara, JD from Notre Dame Law School. He's a lawyer, lecturer, and author on the law of eminent domain, which is quite a controversial thing. Studied and presented on the legal ramifications of the U.S. government's coerced taking of the Black Hills. Matteoni is the author of A Phantom Storm, Sitting Bull, America and the Ghost Dance, and Prairie Man, the struggle between Sitting Bull and Indian agent James McLaughlin. It's all
Thank you,
yours.
Terry. Thank you for the hospitality and the warm greetings from South Dakota. I think I should make the California connection first before I begin talking on the book, the background to putting that story together. I'm a California lawyer who specializes in representing people whose land's being taken by eminent domain for public projects. And so the genesis of my interest in Sitting Bull came from reading Robert Utley's book several years ago. And somewhere in the first third or so of the book, Sitting Bull says, when he's confronted and asked to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, I wish all to know that I do not propose to sell any portion of my country. So that was the touchstone, if you will, of how I began my interest in reading about Sitting Bull's life. But I think this story is more about us, we the people, and how we reacted to the ghost dance and the villainization of Sitting Bull in 1890. That's the heart of the story, and it comes in various directions. But I wanted to start my second start with this image because I am something of a photographer, amateur photographer. And one of my friends said, why did that image get selected? It's my favorite image of Sitting Bull. It's from 1885 by David Barry. And it's within a few years of Sitting Bull coming to Standing Rock Reservation. That same year, he goes on tour with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. But the important point I wanted to make is what's around his neck, hanging on his chest, the crucifix. And I think it is a strange juxtaposition with the religious movement of the ghost dance that took place in 1889 and 1890 on the Sioux Reservation. That crucifix was given to him when he made the statement that I quoted. It was given by Father de Smet as a symbol of peace, a gesture, goodwill, a gift. When Sitting Bull received de Smet into his camp, de Smet came north after most of the the Native Americans involved in the Red Cloud War over the Bozeman Trail signed off the Treaty of Fort Laramie. Sitting Bull was far to the north in and around Williston, Fort Buford, and de Smet said, I will take the message of the treaty north to Sitting Bull. He did so. Sitting Bull warmly received him, in fact, put him in his own tent. They discussed the issues over a couple of days, with Sitting Bull rejecting signing the treaty. The gift was made, and from the photograph, it would appear that Sitting Bull kept that for years and allowed it to be on his person when this photograph was taken. The photograph also projects to me a very, he's not exactly smiling, but he's not frowning, a warm person, a person who thinks, but it's really not for me to analyze and tell you who Sitting Bull is. As I said, the story that I'm trying to tell is who we are, who we were in 1890. So I put on the board a big X, and there's more conflicts to the story than what is shown there. But the point is, at this time, Sitting Bull is targeted from various points. The United States Congress debated sending arms to the Dakotas, to Nebraska, to Wyoming in December of 1890. The governor of South Dakota initiated the request, wanting to arm the citizens who were fearful of an uprising coming from the ghost dance. The Army occupied Pine Ridge and Rosebud in November of 1890. Indian Affairs and the Army were at cross purposes over the control of the reservations. So these points of conflict are picked up as the book progresses, but it's also a story in terms of trying to put in context why the perception of the American public, the government, so turned on Sitting Bull. So the book opens with the prelude, the Meadowlark Message, it's called, which was Sitting Bull hearing in 1884, according to oral tradition, the message of a meadowlark that he saw on a ride, telling him the Lakotas will kill you. That chapter provides the opportunity to give a little bit of the background of Sitting Bull's life and where he came from at that point in terms of being committed by the government to Standing Rock Reservation. Originally, and my editor's in the back of the room, I had a different perception of how to write the book. I had a couple of perceptions of the introduction, but the one that evolved and was removed by the editor, and the prologue was substituted of the Meadowlark Message, was taking Charles Eastman, Dr. Charles Eastman, who had come to Pine Ridge in early October 1890 to serve the Indian people at Pine Ridge. And it was his transport by buckboard from Rushville to Pine Ridge. And again, I don't know the geography of South Dakota as you folks do, but I really studied that, and I wanted to pick up the feel of the land. And it was written that Eastman came in a sandstorm. And I, from California perhaps, I pictured an opening scene in a movie, bleak, buckboard, two people, the driver and Eastman, driver not talking to Eastman, driver's a Rushville resident. They arrive at a bleak scene at Pine Ridge. That was my opening scene, but Slater convinced me not to use that and move up the chapter on the Meadowlark message as the prelude, and also, as I said, something of a flashback in filling in pieces so you know why this conflict, why Sitting Bull is targeted as the leader of a potential uprising from the ghost dance. The book also has to initially tell you something of the ghost dance. So there's a chapter on that, on how it swept from the west, coming out of Nevada, the state next to me, by a Paiute prophet, preaching a revival of the Native American, the return of the buffalo, the return of ancestors, if certain prayers and ritual were followed. He preached a nonviolent message in terms of working hard, accepting some aspect of the new life in terms of obviously hard work, but not to engage in more conflict with the United States or the individual states or any branch of the government. His preaching swept from the West through Utah, over the Rockies, and into the Dakotas. It was picked up by a number of tribes. What the Lakota added, which is symbols from the war years, were ghost shirts with eagles, different symbols painted on the ghost shirts. In my view, in reading of the ghost dance and how it was generated, symbols to protect them, as it always had. They knew that bullets pierced Muslim shirts, pierced buckskin, but nonetheless, spiritually, they were asking for protection as they reached for the new movement and what it meant to them. Scott Momaday said it was a desperate plea for help. Why the help? Numerous reasons. So another chapter focuses on the conditions of late 1890, the conditions of the Great Sioux Reservation that had just been splintered in 1889 by yet another government peel off of lands, in this case, and it's particularly dramatized, I think, in Cox Richardson's book on the politics of Wounded Knee. The land, 9 million, 11 million acres of the Great Sioux Reservation that was established by the Treaty of 1868, is taken with the promise to the Lakota at the various reservations within the Great Sioux Reservation, is taken for the purpose of making land available to settlers. It's pushed by the railroad, business interests. It's a natural in terms of how we look at things that we've got to supply the economic basis for the new states of South Dakota and North Dakota that had just happened. And so land had been taken, an important ingredient. The more important ingredient was the continued opposition and work of Sitting Bull in attempting to persuade his people not to vote for the transfer of more land. He fought it in 1888. You heard that he fought it in 1868 with the quote I gave you. So he's a persistent opponent of the diminishment or dispossession of lands for the Lakota people. He was successful in 1888. The votes could not be had on the various reservations within the Great Sioux Reservation. And those reservations were created really when the actual sign-off happened in 1890. The Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, Pine Ridge, Rosebud. So the purpose was to splinter the lands and divide the people. So they weren't in the Great Sioux Reservation any longer. And Sitting Bull understood that and warned his people against that and tried to dissuade them. He was aided by a woman named Catherine Weldon, an Indian rights activist from New York, Brooklyn, New York. The government came back. The government of the United States is very persistent. Came back in 1889 and was successful in getting the votes. Sitting Bull, again, more behind the scenes, thought he had a coalition from the year before. It splintered. The sale was made. He continued to object. He was frustrating the assimilation policies of the United States government in 1890. He's still objecting, notwithstanding that the agreement had been made the year before. That's an important ingredient in terms of understanding the story and why Sitting Bull, not acclimating to reservation life and being a dissident, raising objection, does not sit well in the eyes of the United States government. Finally, getting beyond the background of the story, what I was trying to do is give you a story that builds in intensity, chapter by chapter, with the points of conflict over a very short period of time. The timeline is really Thanksgiving, if I remember correctly, I think it's November 27, to the date of his death, December 15. And I do that with an opening to each chapter of the timeline by taking a newspaper account of what's occurring in and around December 1st, November 27, November 25, and quote that passage from a newspaper. And there is extensive newspaper coverage focusing on Sitting Bull. And then in the chapter that follows that quote, analyze whether the quote was accurate or whether it was an exaggeration of the press. And I probably did that because of the times we live in and the media coverage of, be it politics or taking on people commenting on celebrities and the like, is so prevalent. Well, it was prevalent against Sitting Bull in 1890 through newspaper coverage, which is hopefully a device that makes the story resonate. What is the American public reading? Why are they reading about Sitting Bull? Well, Sitting Bull has always been a villain to the United States government. And I'm not speaking as of 1876. I'm going back to 1868, and years before, there was a book written by a French military officer that was assigned to the United States military and was in the Dakotas when Sitting Bull was leading attacks on Fort Buford in North Dakota area. And he targeted him as the most vile, most despicable Indian that Philippe de Taubrun, the French officer assigned to the United States Army, had encountered. It's an interesting book, My Time in the Dakotas, or not quite sure now the name, but he goes day by day on his life as an Army officer in that era. Of course, it's compounded the view of Sitting Bull by the Little Bighorn and Libby Custer's glorification of Custer, her husband. It continues. Sitting Bull goes to Canada. He flees the aftermath of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He's solicited to come back to surrender to the United States. He insults General Terry, who was one of the officers that was in the effort to corral the Lakotas and force them onto the reservation, the non-reservation Lakota, in 1876. Terry is treated with disdain by Sitting Bull. He refuses to shake his hand. He will not talk with him, but he talks to the counterpart of the Canadian officials and only agrees to see Terry because they asked him to. He insults the commission that came as early as 1883 to Standing Rock, again to talk the Native Americans into giving up more of their land. He told the commission that came that they speak like men who have been drinking whiskey. One of those people that was on the commission is Senator Dawes. Senator Dawes is the author of the Allotment Act in 1887. Dawes well remembers the insults of 1883. So an interesting chapter, at least to me as a lawyer, is the one about the congressional debate over providing arms to the citizens of South Dakota, North Dakota, so forth. Dawes receives that, well, not just Dawes, the United States Senate receives the request that's forwarded by the Secretary of War, having been received by the governor of South Dakota, Millett. We need arms. There's a potential outbreak coming. How do we protect ourselves? And Dawes is the champion of providing the arms to the citizens. There's a debate between Dawes and a senator from Indiana named Voorhees. But the debate, well, Websterian, I think, in argument, great arguments if you want to read the congressional record, is really a sidetrack, because what's before the United States Senate in 1890, December, is an election bill, a furthering of reconstruction of the United States, of providing federal oversight of elections, particularly in the South, but it would apply to the whole country, to protect the black vote. Dawes is a champion of that. The Republicans, I should have told you that he's a Republican, are a champion of that bill. Voorhees is not. He's a Democrat. He's a states' rights person. Let's sidetrack the bill by arguing over arms to the Dakotas. And it's a brilliant contrast of argument between the two. And again, you find particularly Dawes, not, I don't think Voorhees mentions the name, but Dawes singles out Sitting Bull as a leader of this ghost dance movement that's going to spill over into an insurrection. Voorhees concentrates on another character in the book, very important character, General Miles, who heads up the division of the Missouri based in Chicago, oversees the Department of the Platte, oversees the Department of the Dakotas. He's the one that authorizes the occupation of Pine Ridge and Rosebud. And as I said, that took place in November 20 of 1890. Immediately following that comes an opportunity that Miles seeks. It's Thanksgiving time, the week before Thanksgiving. Buffalo Bill has just completed a tour of Europe, is back in the United States, coming through Chicago, invited to dinner with Miles, Nelson Miles. And Nelson Miles gives him a specific assignment. You know Sitting Bull. You had a good relationship with him on the tour for the Wild West show in 1885. I'm asking you to go to Standing Rock and arrest Sitting Bull. Bring him to me. Why is that important? It's another arrow, if you will, aimed at Sitting Bull very, very precisely. It doesn't go as Miles expects, and that's the other point of a conflict in the story between the Army and the Indian Affairs Office. Indian Affairs is represented by James McLaughlin on Standing Rock. James McLaughlin is a good Indian agent, has the well-being of the people of Standing Rock in his mind. He's not looking for just a political appointment. In fact, he's probably on the edge from time to time of losing his position as administrations change. He comes out of Minnesota. He's married to a woman whose primary ancestry is Dakota. He's Catholic. He was born in Ontario or nearby, came to this country at age 21 as a blacksmith, worked himself into a position in obtaining a citizenship of an Indian agent, and did very well, was liked by the people he served at Devil's Lake, Spirit Lake. He gets the assignment to Standing Rock just at the same time that Sitting Bull is being brought back from Canada, and stops at Standing Rock only for a short spell because he's a prisoner of war and he's going to go south to another fort. They have their initial interaction, that is, McLaughlin and Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull is asking for help. He doesn't want to be separated from his people who are now all or primarily confined to Standing Rock. Diplomatically, McLaughlin steps back. I'm not in charge here. The Army's in charge. Well, years later, McLaughlin is definitely in charge. He has well managed Standing Rock. He has given positions to former allies of Sitting Bull, be they on the Indian police or Indian court justices. So he's fractured that alliance, and Sitting Bull does not come to Standing Rock for 22 months. Once he passes through, he is brought back, and he doesn't have the hold on his people that he had as of the time of Little Bighorn. There's lots of competing interests among the natives, and Sitting Bull doesn't fit. They're supposed to farm. He reluctantly takes up farming. He is able to distance himself from the agency headquarters in terms of being able to locate his residence 40 miles away. But 40 miles away also is the home of Lieutenant Bullhead, who ends up as the one leading the arrest of Sitting Bull in December. Why? Sitting Bull has to be watched. But the point of the conflict between McLaughlin and Miles spills over when Miles has sent Buffalo Bill Cody to take Sitting Bull off reservation. McLaughlin intercepts that, sends a telegram to Washington, takes a day or so for it to be processed in terms of going through the bureaucracy of Washington, but a telegram comes back to be delivered to Buffalo Bill that his authorization has been rescinded by the Department of War. So Miles has lost that skirmish, if you will, and it's Miles' intent to replace agents with the Army, former people that were in the Indian Wars, to oversee the assimilation and reservation life of Native Americans. So he's frustrated, but he's not going to give up. And McLaughlin certainly isn't going to give up. I want to read to you a letter and tie it into the newspaper coverage. I'm not going to read the letter. It's pages. I'm going to read you some excerpts. And this is written on October 17, 1890, to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs by James McLaughlin. So the ghost dance movement has picked up at Standing Rock in October. It's not the first reservation in the Dakotas to really grab hold. And in fact, it's got the lesser population of adherents to the movement. McLaughlin writes, as a follow-up to his June letter, where he thought Sitting Bull and a couple of others were fomenting dissent and should be removed from the reservation, that he now writes, I do not wish to be understood as considering the present state of excitement so alarming as to apprehend any immediate uprising or serious outcome. But I do feel it is my duty to report the present craze and nature of the excitement existing among the Sitting Bull faction. So he's just told us there's no sense of alarm. He's got everything under control in October, notwithstanding the problems that are occurring in Pine Ridge, where the Indian agent Daniel Royer is sending letters. Indians are dancing with rifles on their back. There's problems here, not for McLaughlin, who has his firm hand on Standing Rock. But then the letter goes on. Sitting Bull is high priest and leading apostle of this latest Indian absurdity. He's the chief mischief maker. He's a man of low cunning, devoid of a single manly principle. He is a coward and lacks moral courage. He will never lead where there is danger, but is an adept in influencing his ignorant henchmen and followers. He's bitterly opposed to having any surveys made on the reservation, and he is continually agitating and fostering opposition. That's the reason, that last statement. He's challenging the control of Indian affairs, and particularly McLaughlin at Standing Rock. McLaughlin has things well in control, but he has a thorn in his side, and that is Sitting Bull. McLaughlin goes on that among an uneducated and ignorant people, he finds supporters. He is opposed, that is, Sitting Bull is opposed, to everything of an elevating nature and is the most vain, pompous, and untruthful Indian that I ever knew. Sitting Bull is a polygamist, a libertine, a habitual liar, an active obstructionist, and a great obstacle in the civilization of these people. October 17. October 28, the Chicago Tribune picks up this report to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs and runs an extensive article starting on the front page about Sitting Bull fostering a potential rebellion on the reservation, quoting from this, and not always giving the quote to McLaughlin, but characterizing Sitting Bull in the same fashion as McLaughlin had. October 28. There's numerous papers that pick up this type of story. And when you get to the debate in December 3, and before the Congress of the United States, and particularly the debate on the Senate floor, there's more newspaper coverage. The name Sitting Bull continues to be the lead point of the stories. Why? Because of his history as we perceive him, massacring Custer and his troops in June of 1876, his continual opposition, his running away from the United States and taking asylum in Canada. It fits. This guy is a problem. And it only intensifies. The newspaper coverage is, I can't say daily, but 3 or 4 times a week. The Omaha Daily Bee, the Chicago Tribune, obviously the Bismarck Daily Tribune, the St. Louis paper, St. Louis Democrat, the Chadron paper, papers in Nebraska. You can go most anywhere. When you finally get to the death of Sitting Bull, the San Francisco Call Bulletin reports on that. The Los Angeles Times reports on that. The New Mexico, Albuquerque, not quite sure what the full name of the newspaper is, but it picks up on that. I saw at the Indian Center here yesterday a mural, and it had the Detroit Free Press, December 15, 1890. Chief Sitting Bull is killed. He was killed that morning, and the Detroit Free Press has the story, at least according to the photograph of the article that I saw, that same day. The state of newspaper coverage is intense. Newspapers had a great ascendancy in this country from 1870 through 1890. between 1880 and 1890, the population of the United States almost doubled. I think it went from 11 million to 22 million. Newspapers were in all small towns, strong editors, writing stories, needing copy. And you had these services were now in operation, Associated Press, what have you, that could transmit by telegraph stories. So they were there and they just kept coming. I have a chronology, but I'll hold that. I'm just going to tell you that by December, after McLaughlin had succeeded in forestalling the arrest by Buffalo Bill and the Senate debate, and Miles actually walking a line, just to talk about the politics again, Miles is prompted not only to administer to the reservations, and I don't mean just the Lakota, but that's his goal, to put military people in charge of the reservations across the country. I lost my track here with Miles, but he recognizes that the Army of the West, the Frontier Army, is not in the same need for the country as it was. The Army of the West is diminishing in terms of the tasks it has assigned to it across the country. The Army of the West is in competition with the United States Navy that is seeking ascendancy in protecting the seas, particularly as the United States begins to look to the east beyond California for trade and relations with countries in the Far East. Miles knows that. Miles is a very ambitious person. There was rumor that he was seeking the presidency the year or so before the times that we're talking. So Miles is driven by that. And at the same time, Miles had personally visited Pine Ridge in October or early November and knew and told Agent Royer, you don't have the problem you think you do. I've talked to a number of the leaders of the Lakota, the Oglala at Pine Ridge, and there's not a rebellion coming. Miles was personally there, but your problem is these people are hungry, their children are sick, the elders are dying. You push them too far, was the message he brought to Washington. And a hungry, starving people are going to rebel. So Miles sees the problem, and yet, for reasons of politics and his ambitions, accedes to, we've got to occupy those reservations. They occupy the reservations. Is there war? No, there's flight by the people in Pine Ridge and Rosebud to the Badlands. There's submission. The camps of the United States Army in Pine Ridge are right next to the tents of the people that came from the outlying areas in Pine Ridge to say, hey, we're not making trouble. Don't come after us. They're side by side. And there's a great photograph in 1891 after the so-called last Indian War, the uprising that never happened, of a stream, a soldier with his leg up on the bank, a couple of horses taking water out of the stream, and across the stream, just tent after tent. It's a relocation camp. Those are the people in Pine Ridge who came from the outlying areas and were still at the agency headquarters in the early 1890. The point is that there was never an outbreak. There was never, by us, we the people, an attempt to understand the ghost dance religion. None of the tribes throughout the country were singled out as were the Lakota because they had ghost shirts. Sitting Bull was there. Sitting Bull was never a leader of the ghost dance. Yes, he tolerated the ghost dance. Yes, he undoubtedly used the ghost dance to give himself more political ascendancy with his own people again. The recognition that he had before as a unifier of his people, a defender of his people, that had been taken, stripped from him. So he has some responsibility, but McLaughlin visits the ghost dance at Sitting Bull's camp in November and has a discussion with Sitting Bull, invites Sitting Bull to come to agency headquarters to discuss how we can resolve this issue. McLaughlin reports no militancy, no threats made against him and his people that came with him, his entourage. There was no hostility. Sitting Bull and McLaughlin had a conversation. Sitting Bull put McLaughlin off, saying, well, I'll come in and we'll talk. And then the next week he sent a message, well, one of my children is sick, I can't come. And so Sitting Bull never came in, which was to be the location. Once he came in for rations on a Saturday, every other Saturday, McLaughlin would have the Indian police arrest him. Sitting Bull knew, he was warned by the Meadowlark, but he knew that he was under constant surveillance. He knew that Buffalo Bill was sent. He picked up that word, so he was wary. Miles finally gives the order to the commander at Fort Yates. The time has come, December 12th, to arrest Sitting Bull. Use the Indian agency to assist you, is the message. That message is debated by the commander of Fort Yates and James McLaughlin, and McLaughlin convinces the commander, let the Indian police take the lead. There will be less trouble. His own people will do it. The military can serve as backup. And McLaughlin is persuasive. Is that the message that Miles sent? He sent it to the commander to make the arrest and only use the Indian agent good offices for assistance. McLaughlin flipped that program with disastrous results. So you know the end of the story. It's the arrest gone wrong. But the real story, again, of what I'm trying to say in this book is about us and not taking the time to understand, to look at what's behind the embrace of the ghost dance. What's the condition of these people on the reservation that is in such a state of depression that they're asking for divine intervention? The message that is quoted from Wovoka, the Paiute prophet, is Christ is tired of the white race. They have not done his bidding. They have failed the Christian message. And thus I come for the red man, to lift the red man up, to bury the white man with 5 feet of earth and resurrect the red man. Well, that burying statement was alarming. But again, I ask you to consider whether we really examined what was going on or allowed the newspaper coverage, the biases that existed to overwhelm looking at the issue and trying to come up with a solution of providing, instead of cutting rations, under the guise that, hey, population is going down, or it's a means to coerce the Lakota into signing off, of providing for these people, not letting their children die. They're in an environment that is so different from which they came just a few years before, in terms of the open plains, the roaming of the buffalo, the following of the buffalo. They're constrained, they're under constant oversight, they're doled out their food supplies, medicine, told to farm, not really taught how to farm. They were reaching, they were praying for some deliverance, as people always have that suffer from some sort of oppression, that they cannot relieve that themselves. They, so I close with that. Thank you for listening to a California and telling you something of your own lands. I appreciate it. And if there's time, I'm happy to answer any questions.